close your eyes. You are standing on the western bank of the Nile, 4,000 years before the birth of Christ. The air is cool against your skin, that brief, precious hour before the African sun reclaims its dominion over the valley. Around you stretches absolute darkness. Not the diluted darkness of our modern world, compromised by distant city glow, but the complete and total absence of light that humanity knew for 99% of its existence. You are not alone in this darkness. Though you cannot see them, you sense the presence of others. Men and women gathered on this bank, as their ancestors have gathered for generations beyond memory. You are here for the most important moment of the day. The most important moment, in fact, of existence itself. Because in this darkness, a question hangs unspoken but urgent in the minds of every person standing on this riverbank. Will the sun return? As we know, that of course it will. The sun has risen every day of your life, every day of your father's life, every day stretching back to the beginning of human memory. And yet, and this is crucial to understanding everything that follows, the Egyptians who stand beside you in this predynastic darkness do not take this for granted. For them, the sun's return is not a certainty guaranteed by the laws of physics we have learned to trust. It is a victory, a resurrection, a triumph over the powers of annihilation that wait, hungry and patient, in the darkness. And then there, on the eastern horizon, the first hint of gray against black. The darkness does not flee, it fights. But slowly, incrementally, inexorably, the light advances. The gray becomes silver, the silver becomes gold. And then, like a birth, like an explosion, like the most magnificent piece of theater the cosmos has ever staged, the sun breaks free of the horizon. Ra has returned from the dead. Around you, the people exhale. Some raise their hands toward the light. Others bow their heads in acknowledgement of the miracle they have just witnessed. Because that is what this is, a miracle. Not in the debased sense we use the word today, meaning something vaguely unusual or fortunate, but in its original, terrible sense, a cosmic event that sustains the very possibility of existence. The sun that rises before you is not, as we understand it, a ball of fusing hydrogen 93 million miles distant. It is Ra, the supreme god, who has spent the night engaged in desperate combat in the underworld. The Duat, that dark realm beneath the earth where chaos and dissolution wait to unmake creation itself. All night, while you slept, Ra journeyed through 12 hours of darkness in his solar bark, battling the serpent Apophis, the embodiment of primordial chaos who seeks to swallow the sun and return the universe to the undifferentiated nothingness that existed before time began. And Ra has won. Again. He has emerged from the underworld, reborn, resurrected, victorious. The light you see is not merely illumination. It is proof of life's triumph over death, order's triumph over chaos, being's triumph over nothingness. This daily resurrection became the foundation of the most elaborate, sophisticated, and materially expensive response to mortality that human civilization has ever produced. What you are witnessing in this sunrise is not just the beginning of a new day. It is the central sacrament of a culture that would devote more of its wealth, more of its artistic genius, more of its architectural ambition, and more of its theological imagination to defeating death than any civilization before or since. The Egyptians who stand beside you on this riverbank watching Ra's resurrection have made a logical deduction that will shape 3,000 years of history. If the sun can die and be reborn, so can we. If Ra can journey through the underworld and emerge triumphant into the light, so can we. The daily sunrise is not just a natural phenomenon. It is a promise, template, a cosmic assurance that death is not final, that resurrection is possible, that eternity is achievable. This is where our 10-hour journey begins. Not in a tomb, not with a mummy, not even with a pyramid, but here in this moment with this sunrise, with this fundamental conviction that death is not the end but a transition. Not a wall but a door, not annihilation but transformation. Over the next hour, we will trace how this conviction transformed from philosophical hope into material practice. We will journey from the simplest pit graves of Egypt's prehistoric period to the first monumental tombs, from the earliest tentative experiments in preserving the body to the sophisticated theology that would culminate in the pyramids. We will witness the birth of an obsession, not morbid but life-affirming, that would produce the richest funerary culture in human history. But first, we must understand the landscape that made this obsession possible. We must understand the river. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing in the 5th century before Christ, called Egypt the gift of the Nile. This observation, repeated in classrooms for 2.5 millennia, has become so familiar that we no longer hear its profundity. But stand here in this predynastic moment and look at what the Nile has given. You stand on the boundary between two worlds. Behind you, to the west, stretches the desert, the Deshret, the red land, lifeless and eternal and utterly hostile to human existence. Before you, to the east, lies the Kemet, the black land, the narrow ribbon of dark, fertile soil deposited by the river's annual flood. This black earth, rarely more than a few miles wide, is all that separates humanity from oblivion in this landscape. Beyond the black soil on the eastern bank, the desert resumes, stretching hundreds of miles to the Red Sea. Egypt is not a country as we understand countries. It is a river with deserts on either side. It is a 600-mile-long oasis, a slash of green impossibility cutting through an ocean of sand. And the Nile is not simply a water source, not merely a means of irrigation and transportation. The Nile is the visible, tangible manifestation of divine order, the principle the Egyptians would come to call Ma'at, because the Nile does something that no other river in the ancient world does. It floods with absolute, predictable, miraculous regularity. Every year, as the sun reaches its highest point in the sky during the summer solstice, the Nile begins to rise. Not from rain, it almost never rains in Egypt. The flood comes from far to the south, from the summer monsoons in the Ethiopian highlands, 1,000 miles away, sending an enormous pulse of water down the valley. For 4 months, from July through October, the river swells and spreads across the valley floor, covering the fields, depositing a fresh layer of rich, black silt from Central Africa. And then, just as predictably, the flood recedes. The farmers wade into the mud and plant their seeds. The sun, now gentler in the winter months, nurtures the growth. In spring, they harvest, and the cycle begins again. This is not the capricious flooding of the Tigris and Euphrates, which could come early or late, too strong or too weak, bringing either devastation or drought with equal unpredictability. This is order. This is rhythm. This is a promise kept, year after year, generation after generation, for thousands of years before human memory begins to record itself. Stand here long enough and you begin to understand how this river shaped not just Egyptian agriculture, but Egyptian metaphysics. The Nile taught the Egyptians that the universe operates according to predictable principles, that death and rebirth are not random but cyclical, that what appears to die, the drowned fields, the sun swallowed by night, will return, must return. The flood proves it. The sunrise proves it. But here is the crucial insight, the theological leap that makes everything else possible. If the river can die and be reborn, if the sun can die and be reborn, if the fields can be drowned and then flourish again, then death itself is not an ending but a stage in a cycle. Death is the necessary prelude to resurrection, just as night is the necessary prelude to dawn, just as the flood is the necessary prelude to the harvest. The Egyptians had 2 words for eternity, and understanding them is essential to understanding their entire civilization. The first is Nihe. This is cyclical time, eternal recurrence, the rhythm of the cosmos. Nihe is the sun's daily death and resurrection, the moon's monthly waxing and waning, the river's annual flood and recession, the season's endless wheel. Nihe is time that circles back on itself, that renews and regenerates, that dies and is reborn. Nihe is the eternity of the sun god Ra, who journeys through the sky by day and the underworld by night, forever and ever. in an endless circuit that began at creation and will continue until the universe unmakes itself. The second word is jet. This is linear time, eternal permanence, the unchanging and indestructible. Jet is the eternity of stone, of monuments, of names carved in granite that will endure when flesh has turned to dust. Jet is the eternity of Osiris, the god of the dead, who was murdered and dismembered, but whose body was reassembled and preserved forever in the underworld. Jet is the eternity the Egyptians sought for themselves, not the exhausting endless cycling of Nihei, but the permanent, unchanging existence of the blessed dead. These two eternities are not contradictory but complementary, two aspects of the same cosmic reality. The deceased pharaoh joins Ra in his eternal solar circuit, that is Nihei, but the pharaoh's body, preserved and entombed, his name carved in stone, his monuments standing imperishable, that is Jet. To achieve complete immortality, both eternities must be secured. This is why the Egyptians buried their dead on the western bank of the Nile, where you stand now. The west is where the sun dies each evening, descending into the Duat, the underworld, to begin its nightly journey through darkness toward resurrection. The west is the direction of death, and therefore the direction of rebirth. The living build their cities and plant their fields on the eastern bank, where the sun rises. The dead occupy the western bank, where the sun sets, waiting like the sun itself to be reborn. Look around you now in this predynastic moment. The tombs are simple, pit graves, really shallow excavations in the desert sand, just far enough from the valley floor to be safe from the annual flood. But even these simple graves reveal the beginnings of the obsession that will flower into pyramids and golden masks and books of the dead. Because these graves are not empty, let us descend into one of these early graves. It is approximately 3,800 BCE, almost 6,000 years ago. We are at Nakata, one of the key predynastic settlements in Upper Egypt, about 25 miles north of modern Luxor. The grave we are examining belongs to a person of some status, perhaps a village headman, perhaps a successful hunter or trader. We will never know their name. Writing has not yet been invented, but we can read their hope in what they left behind. The body lies on its left side, knees drawn up to the chest in the fetal position, head pointing south, face turned toward the west, toward the sunset, toward the direction the sun takes when it descends into the realm of the dead. Already, in this simple positioning, we see the theological reasoning at work. The deceased is oriented toward the west because that is the direction of the journey they must take. They lie in the fetal position because they are waiting to be reborn, just as the sun is reborn each morning. But it is what surrounds the body that reveals the extraordinary leap of imagination these predynastic Egyptians have made. Pottery vessels cluster near the head and feet, dozens of them. Some contain food, emmer wheat, barley, dates, figs. Others contain beer, that essential Egyptian beverage made from fermented bread. There are stone bowls and jars, carefully shaped from the hard stones of the desert. There are flint knives, their blades still sharp after 60 centuries. There are ivory combs, cosmetic palettes for grinding malachite into green eye paint, beads of carnelian and shell. In some graves, we find clay figurines of cattle, sheep, and goats. Ask yourself, why? Why place food with a corpse? Why provide tools and ornaments to the dead? There is only one possible answer, and it is the answer that will drive Egyptian civilization for the next 3,000 years. Because the dead are not dead. Not truly. Not finally. The dead still need to eat. They still need to drink. They still need tools and possessions and beautiful things. They still need, in some form we are only beginning to understand, to be. This is the radical departure, the cognitive revolution that makes everything else possible. At some point in the deep Egyptian past, human consciousness made a decision. Death is not annihilation. The person, the identity, the self, the animating consciousness that makes you you, continues beyond the body's failure. But that continuation requires preparation, requires provision, requires action by the living. The archaeologist Flinders Petrie excavated thousands of these predynastic graves in the late 19th century. What he found was a consistent pattern. Even the poorest graves contain some provision for the afterlife. Even the simplest burial suggests belief in continuation. This is not the privilege of an elite. This is a civilization-wide conviction that death transforms but does not end existence. But here, in these early graves, we also encounter the first terrible problem that will haunt Egyptian mortuary practice for millennia. The body does not last. The hot, dry sand of the Egyptian desert is, accidentally, an excellent preservative. Bodies buried directly in the sand, without coffins or wrappings, often mummified naturally, the moisture drawn out rapidly by the desiccating heat, the flesh preserved as leather-like tissue clinging to bone. The Egyptians who dug up these graves, whether to reuse the burial ground or to rob it, would have found bodies that, though dead for decades or even centuries, remained recognizable. The features, though sunken and darkened, were still there. The hair still clung to the skull. The fingers and toes were still intact. This natural mummification must have seemed like evidence, like proof, that the afterlife preparations were working. The dead endured. The body could be preserved. Existence could continue. But as Egyptian society became more complex, as wealth accumulated and social hierarchies deepened, the simple pit grave began to seem inadequate for people of status. Important people began to be buried in more elaborate structures. Pits lined with mud brick, roofed with wooden beams, sometimes divided into multiple chambers for the storage of grave goods. These were the first steps toward what we might recognize as tombs. And immediately, a crisis emerged. The more elaborate the burial, the worse the preservation of the body. Isolated from direct contact with the desiccating sand, wrapped in linen, enclosed in wooden coffins, protected from the elements, the bodies began to rot. The Egyptians must have discovered this with horror. They were trying to honor their dead with more elaborate burials, providing them with greater comfort and more grave goods, and the result was that the bodies decomposed. The flesh liquefied, the bones separated. The person, the physical vessel that the spirit required, was destroyed. This disaster, this failure of the body to endure, would drive the development of artificial mummification, the chemical preservation of the flesh, the elaborate technology of immortality that would eventually involve the removal of internal organs, the desiccation of tissue with natron salt, and the wrapping of the body in hundreds of yards of resin-soaked linen. But that technology is still centuries in the future. Here, in the Predynastic period, the Egyptians are still experimenting, still learning, still trying to solve the fundamental problem. How do we preserve the body so the spirit has a home to return to? Let us move forward in time, to approximately 3,500 BCE, and travel north to Hierakonpolis, the city of the hawk, one of the most important centers of predynastic Egyptian culture. Here, we find evidence of increasingly sophisticated burial practices and, crucially, the first hints of the elaborate afterlife theology that will eventually be codified in the pyramid texts and the Book of the Dead. In Tomb 100 at Hierakonpolis, excavated in 1898, archaeologists found something unprecedented: painted walls. The tomb itself was a substantial structure, cut into the desert gravel with plastered walls. And on those walls, painted in yellows, whites, reds, and blacks, were scenes that seemed to depict the journey after death. The paintings are damaged, fragmentary, difficult to interpret with certainty. But we can make out boats, many boats, traveling on a river. We see human figures, some with their arms raised in what might be gestures of worship or greeting. We see animals, lions, ibexes, gazelles. We see what appears to be a scene of combat or hunting. And we see geometric patterns that might represent the stars, the sky, the cosmos itself. These are not decorations. These are instructions. These are maps. This is the beginning of what will become the most extensive body of mortuary literature in human history. The texts and images that will guide the dead through the dangers of the afterlife, that will provide them with spells and knowledge and protection, that will tell them what to say and what to do and how to navigate the realm of the dead. Already, in this predynastic tomb at Hierakonpolis, we see the emergence of a crucial concept. The afterlife is a journey. It is not automatic, not passive. The deceased must travel, must know the way, must have the proper equipment and the proper knowledge. The boats painted on the wall are not metaphorical. The Egyptians believed, quite literally, that the dead must cross water, must navigate rivers and lakes in the underworld, must have a vessel to carry them. This makes perfect sense in the Egyptian context. In life, the Nile is the highway of Egypt. Every journey of any significance is made by boat. Trade, warfare, administration, pilgrimage, all depend on the river. Why would death be any different? Of course the dead must travel by boat. Of course they must cross water. The underworld, the Duat, is imagined as a dark, inverted version of the Nile Valley, with its own river, its own banks, its own geography. But to navigate this dark river, to make this journey successfully, the deceased needs help. They need provisions. They need tools. They need knowledge. And increasingly, as Egyptian society grows more complex and hierarchical, they need something else. They need status, recognition, and power that will persist beyond death. This is where we begin to see the emergence of monumental architecture dedicated to the dead. We are now in the crucial transitional period between Predynastic Egypt and the emergence of the unified Egyptian state, approximately 3200 to 3000 BCE. The landscape of death is changing. The simple pit graves still serve the common people, but for the emerging elite, the chiefs and rulers who are consolidating power in regional centers, something more substantial is required. At Abydos, in the desert west of the Nile in Upper Egypt, we find the royal necropolis of Egypt's earliest kings. This site will remain sacred for 3,000 years, becoming the cult center of Osiris, the god of death and resurrection. But here, at the dawn of Egyptian civilization, it is simply the burial ground of the rulers who are unifying the two lands, Upper and Lower Egypt, into a single kingdom. The tombs at Abydos from this period are called chamber tombs, and they represent a quantum leap in mortuary architecture. These are not pits but substantial subterranean structures, some divided into as many as 12 separate chambers. The burial chamber itself occupies the center, surrounded by magazines, storage rooms for grave goods. And what grave goods they are! In the tomb of King Djur, who ruled around 3050 BCE, archaeologists found evidence of staggering wealth. Hundreds of pottery vessels, stone bowls of exquisite craftsmanship, copper tools, ivory labels inscribed with early hieroglyphs, and, most troubling to our modern sensibilities, evidence of retainer sacrifice. Surrounding the king's burial chamber were subsidiary graves containing the bodies of servants, attendants, and courtiers who were buried at the same time as the king, presumably to serve him in the afterlife. This practice, which appears in the earliest royal burials and disappears by the beginning of the Third Dynasty, reveals something profound about early Egyptian concepts of the afterlife. The king does not journey alone. He requires his court, his servants, his administrators. The afterlife is not an abstract spiritual realm but a concrete continuation of earthly existence, with the same hierarchies, the same needs, the same structures of power. But notice what is happening here. The tomb is no longer simply a container for a body and its provisions. The tomb is becoming a house, a dwelling place for the continued existence of the deceased. The multiple chambers mirror the multiple rooms of a palace or great house. The magazines storing grave goods are like the storerooms of an estate. The tomb is architecture designed for habitation, albeit habitation by the dead. This concept will reach its full flowering in the mastaba tombs of the early dynastic period and the Old Kingdom. But to understand the mastaba, we must first understand a moment of supreme historical importance: the unification of Egypt. Around 3100 BCE, a ruler named Narmer, also known as Menes in later tradition, succeeded in conquering Lower Egypt and uniting it with Upper Egypt under a single crown. This unification is commemorated in one of the most important objects from ancient Egypt, the Narmer palette, a ceremonial stone palette carved with scenes of the king's victory, now in the Cairo Museum. The significance of this unification for our story of immortality and eternity cannot be overstated. A unified Egypt means a unified theology. It means the consolidation of regional gods and beliefs into a coherent system. It means the resources of the entire Nile Valley can be directed toward increasingly ambitious projects. And it means that the king, the pharaoh, now occupies a unique position in the cosmic order. The pharaoh is not simply a powerful human being. He is the living embodiment of Horus, the hawk god, son of Osiris and Isis. He is the mediator between the human and divine realms. He is responsible for maintaining Ma'at cosmic order against the forces of chaos. And when he dies, he must not simply survive in the afterlife like a nobleman or commoner. He must become a god himself, joining the company of the gods who sustain the universe. This theological elevation of the kingship drives the next phase of mortuary architecture, the mastaba. The word mastaba comes from the Arabic word for bench, because these tombs, when encountered by later Arabs, resembled the mud brick benches outside traditional houses. But to the ancient Egyptians, the mastaba was far more than a bench. It was a machine for ensuring immortality. Let us examine a typical mastaba from the early First Dynasty, around 3000 BCE, at Saqqara, the great necropolis serving Memphis, the new capital of unified Egypt located at the junction of Upper and Lower Egypt. A mastaba is a rectangular structure with sloping sides, built of mud brick, rising perhaps 10 to 15 feet above the desert surface. Beneath this superstructure, cut deep into the bedrock, is the actual burial chamber, reached by a vertical shaft or a descending stairway. Once the body and grave goods are in place, this shaft is filled with rubble and sealed. The burial chamber is meant to be inaccessible, eternal, inviolate. But here is the crucial innovation. The superstructure above ground is not solid. Contains chambers, real, accessible rooms. These rooms serve a specific function. They are where the living come to maintain contact with the dead. In the eastern face of the mastaba, facing the rising sun, there is often a false door, a stone slab carved to look like a door, but which does not actually open. This false door is the interface between the world of the living and the world of the dead. It is here that the Ka, the spiritual double of the deceased, can emerge from the tomb to receive offerings from the living. Already, we see the emergence of one of the most important concepts in Egyptian afterlife theology, the Ka. This is not the soul as we understand it, not the immortal spirit that ascends to heaven. The Ka is something more concrete, more physical. It is the life force, the vital energy that animates the body. At death, the Ka separates from the body, but it does not depart. It remains near the tomb. It requires sustenance, food, drink, incense, offerings, and it requires a home, a physical anchor in the world. The body itself, preserved in the burial chamber deep beneath the mastaba, serves as this anchor. As long as the body endures, the Ka has a home. As long as the Ka receives offerings at the false door, the deceased continues to exist in some meaningful sense. This is why preservation of the body becomes absolutely critical. This is why the Egyptians will eventually develop the elaborate art of mummification. The body must endure because the Ka needs it. But there is another aspect of the self that also requires attention: the Ba. If the Ka is the life force, the Ba is closer to what we might call personality or identity. The Ba is often depicted in Egyptian art as a human-headed bird, because it has the ability to move, to fly, to travel between the tomb and the world of the living. During the day, the Ba might leave the tomb to enjoy the sunlight, to visit familiar places, to partake in the world it knew in life. But at night, the Ba must return to the tomb to reunite with the body. This is why the tomb must be marked, must be visible, must be recognizable. The Ba needs to be able to find its way home. This necessity will drive the development of increasingly elaborate superstructures. Mastabas will grow larger, more decorated, more distinctive. Eventually, they will evolve into something unprecedented in human history: the pyramid. But we are not yet at pyramids. We are still in the first dynasty, still watching the Egyptians work out the practical and theological problems of immortality. Walk with me through the Saqqara necropolis in the reign of King Den, approximately 2975 BCE. We are surrounded by mastabas, dozens of them, scores of them, stretching across the desert plateau. These are the tombs of the nobility, the officials, the administrators of the unified Egyptian state. Each tomb represents an enormous investment of labor, resources, and wealth. Each tomb represents a family's determination to ensure that their dead continue to exist, continue to matter, continue to participate in the eternal order of the cosmos. Stop here, at the mastaba of a nobleman whose name is lost to us. The structure is impressive, perhaps 100 feet long, 60 feet wide, 15 feet high, its sloping walls gleaming white with gypsum plaster. We approach from the east, where the false door is located. The offering chapel is small but beautifully decorated. On the walls, painted in reds and blacks and ochres, are scenes of daily life. Cattle being herded, grain being harvested, bread being baked, beer being brewed. But these are not decorations in the sense we understand them. These are not meant to beautify the tomb or provide pleasant scenes for visitors. These images have a magical function. They ensure that the deceased will have access to these goods in the afterlife. The bread painted on the wall becomes bread for the Ka to eat. The cattle depicted in the fields become cattle for the deceased to own. The servants shown brewing beer become servants who will actually brew beer in eternity. This is sympathetic magic, the principle that an image or model of something can, under the right ritual circumstances, become the thing itself. It is a principle that will dominate Egyptian mortuary practice for thousands of years. It explains why tomb walls will be covered with elaborate scenes of banquets and harvests and workshops. It explains why tombs will be filled with model boats, model granaries, model bakeries. These are not symbolic representations. They are the actual items, transubstantiated into eternal form through ritual and image. On the false door itself, we see the first hieroglyphic inscriptions designed to ensure immortality. The Hetep D Nisu formula, an offering which the king gives. This formula, which will appear on tens of thousands of funerary monuments throughout Egyptian history, establishes a crucial chain of transmission. The gods give offerings to the king. The king redistributes these offerings to the nobles. The nobles, in death, continue to receive their share through the daily offerings presented at their tombs. But already, the Egyptians are confronting a practical problem. Who will maintain these offerings in perpetuity? Imagine you are an Egyptian nobleman in the early First Dynasty. You have spent years preparing your tomb, commissioning the finest craftsmen, stockpiling grave goods, ensuring that every detail is perfect. You have arranged for an endowment, lands whose produce will fund the daily offerings at your tomb. You have hired priests, ka-priests, whose sole function is to present these offerings at your false door, to recite your name, to ensure your continued existence. But here is the question that must have haunted every Egyptian who made these preparations. How long will it last? Your son will surely maintain the offerings, perhaps your grandson. But what about the 10th generation? The 20th? What happens when your family line dies out, when the endowment is stolen or diverted, when the priests take the offering food for themselves and neglect to recite your name? What happens when memory of you fades, when no one remembers who you were, when your very name is forgotten? This is the terror that drives so much of Egyptian mortuary practice. The fear of the second death, the true death, the final death, the death that comes when your name is no longer spoken, when your Ka no longer receives offerings, when your identity is erased from human memory and cosmic record. The Egyptians developed several strategies to address this problem. First, they built in stone. Mud brick was the standard building material for houses, palaces, even many temples. These structures were meant to last a generation or two, then be rebuilt. But tombs must last forever. So tombs were increasingly built of stone. Limestone, granite, alabaster, materials that would endure for millennia. Second, they carved their names in stone, not painted, which could fade, not written on papyrus, which could burn, but carved, chiseled, cut into stone with copper tools, so that even when the paint flaked away, even when the plaster fell, even when the wood rotted and the linen disintegrated, the name would remain. As long as the name remained, the person continued to exist in some essential way. Third, they created endowments and contracts intended to last in perpetuity. Tombs of the Old Kingdom contain elaborate contracts specifying exactly what offerings must be provided, how frequently, by whom. These contracts appeal to cosmic justice. Any priest who neglects his duty, any heir who diverts the endowment, will face the judgment of the gods. They will be denied their own afterlife. Their names will be erased. But there is a fundamental problem with all these strategies, and it is a problem the Egyptians could see evidence of even in their own time. They fail. Families die out. Endowments are stolen. Tombs are robbed. Names are forgotten. The second death comes for almost everyone, elite and commoner alike. This grim reality will eventually drive theological innovations. The development of the concept that immortality depends not primarily on the physical tomb and material offerings, but on moral righteousness, on magical knowledge, on the favor of the gods. But that theology is still hundreds of years in the future. Here, at the beginning of the first dynasty, the Egyptians are still convinced that the material approach can work, that immortality can be achieved through architecture and endowment and priestly service. Let us move forward again to the reign of Den, the fifth king of the first dynasty, around 2975 BCE. Den's reign is crucial for several reasons. He is the first king to use the title King of Upper and Lower Egypt, emphasizing the unification. He is the first king to celebrate the Sed festival, a ritual of kingly renewal that will become central to pharaonic ideology. And his tomb at Abydos shows significant architectural innovations. Den's burial chamber is reached by a descending stairway cut into the bedrock. The first use of this design, which allows the burial to take place and the chamber to be stocked with grave goods before the tomb is sealed, rather than having to lower everything down a vertical shaft. This seemingly practical innovation has theological significance. The descending stairway is a path into the underworld, a deliberate journey downward into the realm of the dead. In Den's tomb, archaeologists found evidence of enormous wealth: thousands of pottery vessels, copper and stone tools, ivory labels inscribed with hieroglyphs recording the events of his reign, and most remarkably, a floor paved with red and black granite, the first use of granite in Egyptian architecture, quarried from Aswan hundreds of miles to the south and transported down the Nile on barges. This use of granite is significant. Limestone, the stone of the Giza Plateau and the Saqqara necropolis, is relatively soft, easy to cut and carve. But granite is almost indestructible. Granite endures. Granite is eternal. The choice to line the burial chamber floor with granite is a statement. This tomb will last forever. This burial is permanent. This is jet, eternal, unchanging, indestructible existence. Surrounding Den's tomb at Abydos are more than 100 subsidiary burials. Retainers, servants, courtiers buried at the time of the king's death to serve him in the afterlife. This practice, as I mentioned earlier, will not continue beyond the second dynasty. But its existence in these early tombs tells us something important. The afterlife in this early period is conceived as almost identical to earthly life. The king needs his servants. He needs his administrators. He needs his household. Death changes location but not structure. However, even as these elaborate royal burials are being constructed at Abydos, a shift is beginning. The administrative capital of Egypt is at Memphis, near modern Cairo, at the strategic junction of Upper and Lower Egypt. And at Saqqara, the necropolis serving Memphis, the nobles and officials who actually run the country on behalf of the king are building their own tombs that, in some cases, rival the king's own tomb in size and elaboration. This creates a problem. If a nobleman's tomb is as grand as the king's, if his afterlife provisions are as extensive, if his claim to immortality is equally secure, then what makes the king special? What justifies his unique position as the living Horus, the son of Ra, the mediator between humanity and the gods? This tension, between the king's unique divine status and the nobility's increasing wealth and power, will drive the next great leap in mortuary architecture. The king must have a tomb that is not just larger than the nobles' tombs, but categorically different. A tomb that makes a statement visible for miles, for centuries, for eternity. A tomb that is not just a building but a theological argument in stone. We are approaching the moment when the mastaba will evolve into something unprecedented. The Step Pyramid. But before we arrive at that moment, we must understand one more crucial development in early Egyptian theology: the emergence of Osiris as the god of the dead and the afterlife. The gods of Predynastic Egypt were many and varied, local deities associated with particular towns and regions, animal gods, nature gods, sky gods, earth gods. But as Egypt unified politically, it also began to unify theologically. Regional gods were assimilated into broader categories. Theological systems were created to explain how the gods related to one another. And certain deities rose to prominence because the stories told about them addressed the most fundamental human questions. Osiris is one of these deities, and his myth becomes absolutely central to Egyptian afterlife theology. The story of Osiris is a story of death and resurrection, the template, the proof that death need not be final. Osiris, the myth tells us, was once a king of Egypt, a good and just ruler who taught humanity agriculture, law, and civilization. His brother Set, consumed by jealousy and ambition, murdered him. The accounts vary. Some say Set trapped Osiris in a coffin and threw it in the Nile. Others say he dismembered Osiris's body and scattered the pieces across Egypt. But the result was the same. Osiris was dead, murdered, his body destroyed or lost. His wife Isis, who was also his sister, as the gods' family relationships followed the divine logic rather than human taboos, refused to accept this finality. She searched the length of Egypt for Osiris's body. In some versions, she found the coffin. In others, she gathered the scattered pieces of his dismembered body. Through her magical powers, through her love, through her refusal to accept death as annihilation, she restored Osiris. She reconstituted his body. And through a sacred act, the sources are discrete, but the implication is sexual union with the restored corpse. She conceived a son, Horus. But Osiris could not return to life in the normal sense. He had crossed the boundary into death. He had entered the Duat, the underworld. So instead of returning to rule Egypt, Osiris became the ruler of the realm of the dead. He became the judge before whom the deceased must appear. He became the guarantor that death, though real, need not be final. He became the proof that the body can be preserved, that resurrection is possible, that eternity can be achieved. This myth becomes foundational to Egyptian afterlife belief. Every deceased person in death becomes an Osiris. The rituals performed on the corpse recapitulate what Isis did for Osiris. The mummification process is explicitly modeled on the preservation of Osiris's body. The justified dead are called the Osiris name, Osiris Amenhotep, Osiris Nefertari, identifying them with the resurrected god. But in this early period, in the first and second dynasties, Osiris worship is just beginning to emerge. The theology is not yet fully developed. The myths are not yet standardized. What we see in these early burials is experimentation, variation, the working out of ideas that will eventually crystallize into the elaborate system we find in the pyramid texts and later funerary literature. What is consistent, though, across all regions and all periods, is the conviction that death is not the end. The body must be preserved. The name must endure. Offerings must be provided. The tomb must stand as an eternal house for the deceased. These are not optional niceties. They are necessities, requirements for continued existence. And as the second dynasty gives way to the third dynasty, around 2686 BCE, we arrive at one of the most extraordinary moments in human history: the reign of King Djoser and the construction of the first pyramid. We are standing now at Saqqara in the early years of the Third Dynasty, approximately 2670 BCE. Before us rises something that has never existed before in human history. A building of stone, not mud brick. Not just any building, but a structure of such scale, such ambition, such audacity that it seems to challenge the sky itself. The Step Pyramid of Djoser rises in 6 massive steps, each layer smaller than the one below, creating a stairway from earth to heaven. The structure stands 200 feet high, taller than any building that has ever existed. It dominates the desert plateau, visible for miles in every direction. It is not painted, not plastered, but faced with brilliant white limestone that catches the sun and gleams like a beacon, like a piece of earth that has been transformed into light itself. This is not a mastaba. This is not simply a larger version of what came before. This is a categorical revolution in architecture, theology, and the very concept of what a king's eternal resting place should be. The architect of this revolution has a name, Imhotep. He is Djoser's vizier, his chief architect, his advisor. Later Egyptian tradition will deify him, worshipping him as a god of wisdom and medicine. Greek authors will identify him with Asclepius. His name will be remembered for 3,000 years. And this is fitting because what Imhotep creates here at Saqqara is not just a building. It is a new way of thinking about death, resurrection, and immortality. Let us understand what Imhotep has done. He began with a traditional mastaba, a rectangular structure of stone, not mud brick, but otherwise conventional. But then, instead of stopping, he expanded. He built a second, smaller mastaba on top of the first, then a third, then a fourth. The structure grew upward in stages, each addition taking it higher, reaching further into the sky, until it achieved its final form. 6 stepped levels, a ziggurat-like mountain of stone. But why? Why this form? Why steps? The answer is theological. The pyramid is a stairway, not metaphorically but functionally. This is a structure the dead king's spirit can climb. This is how the pharaoh ascends from earth to heaven, from mortality to divinity, from the realm of the living to the realm of the gods. Remember the dual concepts of eternity, Nihe and Jet. The pyramid addresses both. The stone structure provides Jet, permanent, unchanging existence. The burial chamber deep beneath the pyramid, hewn from bedrock and sealed with tons of stone, creates a protected space where the body can endure forever. But the pyramid also provides access to Nihe, the cyclical eternity of the sun god Ra. The steps allow the deceased king to climb to heaven, to join Ra's circuit, to participate in the eternal daily resurrection of the sun. Surrounding the pyramid, Imhotep has created an entire complex, a temple precinct enclosed by a massive limestone wall. Within this enclosure are temples, courtyards, chapels, shrines, and most remarkably, stone buildings that seem to have no practical function. These are dummy buildings, their doors carved from stone and impossible to open, their interiors sometimes filled with rubble. They are not meant for the living to use. They are meant for the king's Ka in the afterlife. A complete palace complex, rendered in eternal stone, where the king can continue to rule, to perform rituals, to exercise his kingship throughout eternity. In the subterranean chambers beneath the pyramid, archaeologists have found rooms lined with blue faience tiles, imitating the reed matting of palace walls. They have found thousands of stone vessels, more than 30,000 in some counts, carved from alabaster, schist, breccia, porphyry, every fine stone available in Egypt. They have found grain storage chambers stocked with actual grain. They have found the burial chambers of royal family members, queens, princesses, buried near the king so they could join him in eternity. But most significantly, they have found evidence of the beginning of funerary texts, not yet the elaborate pyramid texts we will encounter in later pyramids, but fragments, hints, the first stirrings of the written spells and instructions that will guide the dead through the afterlife. The Step Pyramid complex at Saqqara represents the crystallization of everything we have traced in this episode. The simple pit grave has evolved into this, a mountain of stone, a theological argument made manifest, a technology for defeating death that required millions of man-hours of labor, the quarrying and transportation and shaping of millions of tons of limestone, the invention of new architectural techniques, new engineering solutions, new ways of organizing labor on a scale never before attempted. And yet, despite its unprecedented scale, the Step Pyramid is only the beginning, because Imhotep's step design, brilliant as it is, will itself be superseded. The next generation of builders will look at these steps and see them as imperfect, as incomplete. They will envision something even more audacious. A pyramid with smooth sides, a perfect geometric form, a structure that doesn't provide steps for the king to climb, but rather creates a single, unified ramp of stone angled directly at the imperishable stars of the northern sky. We stand now at the cusp of the Pyramid Age, the Old Kingdom, when Egypt will devote its entire civilization to the construction of resurrection machines in stone, when the theology of solar ascension will be carved directly onto burial chamber walls, when gold will begin to appear not as mere ornament but as divine flesh, the incorruptible material of the gods themselves. Let us return one final time to where we began, the banks of the Nile at dawn. The sun rises over the eastern horizon, as it has every day for millions of years before human consciousness existed to witness it, as it will for billions of years after humanity is gone. But for the Egyptians standing on this riverbank, this sunrise is not an impersonal astronomical event. It is a promise. It is proof. It is the daily demonstration that death can be overcome, that resurrection is real, that eternity is achievable. In this single hour, we have traced the birth of an obsession. We have watched a culture take the natural cycles they observed, the sun's death and rebirth, the river's flood and recession, the season's endless wheel, and transform them into a theology of immortality. We have seen this theology drive material practice. From simple pit graves to elaborate chamber tombs, from mud brick to imperishable stone, from a handful of pottery vessels to 30,000 stone bowls, from anonymous burials to pyramids that declare their occupant's name to the sky itself. We have encountered the fundamental concepts that will structure all Egyptian afterlife belief. The Ka and the Ba, the different aspects of the self that survive death, Jet and Nihe, the two eternities, Marat, the cosmic order that must be maintained, Osiris, the god who proved that death is not final, and Ra, the sun god whose daily resurrection provides the template for human immortality. We have watched architecture evolve from simple markers of burial sites to elaborate technologies for ensuring eternal existence. We have seen the emergence of offering cults, priestly service, endowments, and contracts designed to maintain the dead in perpetuity. We have witnessed the first use of images and models as magical provisions for the afterlife. We have encountered the first fragments of what will become the most extensive mortuary literature in human history. And we have arrived at Djoser's Step Pyramid, standing at the threshold of the Pyramid Age, ready to explore in our next episode how the smooth-sided pyramids of Giza will perfect the architecture of ascension, how the pyramid texts will provide the first complete written guide to the afterlife, and how gold will emerge as the supreme material, the flesh of the gods, the substance of immortality itself. But before we step through that threshold, consider what we have learned about the Egyptian mind, the Egyptian soul, the Egyptian confrontation with mortality. The Egyptians looked at death and refused to accept it as final. They looked at decay and committed themselves to preventing it. They looked at oblivion and determined to defeat it through memory, through stone, through ritual, through the sheer force of will and imagination. They understood that individual human consciousness, the thing that makes you you, the identity, the person, the self, is precious beyond measure and worth any effort, any expense, any labor to preserve. Modern people sometimes look at Egyptian mortuary practices with incomprehension or even contempt. Why this obsession with death? Why these elaborate tombs, these mummified bodies, these funerary texts? Doesn't it represent a morbid culture, a civilization unable to accept natural limits, a people who wasted their resources on the dead instead of improving life for the living? But this judgment misunderstands the Egyptian worldview fundamentally. For the Egyptians, the tomb was not a waste but an investment. The offerings were not consumed by the dead but shared between the living and the dead. The preservation of the body was not morbid but necessary, no more morbid than we consider the preservation of photographs and mementos of deceased loved ones. And the resources devoted to eternity were not stolen from life but were the highest expression of what made life meaningful. The conviction that we matter, that our existence has significance, that the universe is ordered in such a way that death does not have the final word. The Egyptians built pyramids because they believed in eternity. They created mummies because they refused to let their loved ones disappear into nothingness. They carved names in stone because they understood that identity is precious and memory is sacred. They covered their dead in gold because they believed that the incorruptible material of divinity could transform mortal flesh into imperishable godhood. In our next episode, we will ascend with the pharaohs into the sky, climbing the pyramid's shining sides to join Ra in his eternal circuit. We will read the words carved in burial chambers 5,000 years ago, spells designed to transform the king into an Ak, a transfigured spirit of light and power. We will encounter the gods face to face, learn their secret names, and discover the pathways through the